Section 1. Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. You're standing in the middle of a snow-covered field somewhere in 1812 Russia. The wind bites your ears, your boots squelch with every step through ice and sludge, and you, unfortunately, are wearing a coat fastened with tin buttons. You probably won't survive this. Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who redefined ambition, battle strategy, and strangely military fashion, had a peculiar fixation with uniforms, not just how they looked, but how they closed. Brass, pewter, bone, tin, each button was a statement, and sometimes a death sentence. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling chatty, post your location and what time it is where you are. I always love seeing where we're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together.
You're a soldier now, a weary one, trudging through white stillness under Napoleon's command, wearing a finely stitched coat with shiny buttons gleaming against the gray gloom. The buttons look great at first, but within weeks, days even, they begin to tarnish, crack, fall off, one by one, a slow shedding of dignity and insulation.
You pull your coat tighter, trying to stop the cold from threading through every seam. But here's the strange thing. These weren't just buttons. They were meant to be symbols of power, of discipline, of modernity. Napoleon, ever the micromanager, obsessed over details down to the number of buttons on a sleeve cuff. 13, too unlucky, 11, unbalanced, 12. Now that was a number with purpose. There's something quietly ridiculous about this, isn't there? Imagine being part of the most formidable army in Europe, and your general is writing memos about lapel width and brass polishing schedules. But that was Napoleon, part warlord, part fashion editor. Historians still argue whether this obsession with buttons and detail was strategic, a way to instill pride, discipline, unity, or simply a vanity project with dangerous consequences. After all, when you care more about a soldier's silhouette than their shoe's durability, something's bound to unravel. You glance at your fellow soldiers. Some are older veterans, their coats stitched and restitched. Others are young conscripts, their uniforms barely broken in. Each wears a version of the standard French greatcoat, and each is haunted by the same creeping cold. It wasn't always like this. A few years earlier, Napoleon's armies marched through sun-drenched Italy, dry German plains, even parts of Spain. There, the buttons were mostly decorative, but in Russia, every button mattered. Lose one, and the icy wind would crawl straight down your shirt like an angry ghost. You stop for a moment, adjusting your coat. One button, near your throat, is hanging by a single fraying thread. You think about fixing it, maybe later, maybe if you live through the next frost.
The thing is, buttons weren't just failing from wear and tear, they were falling victim to the cold itself. Many of Napoleon's uniforms were fastened with tin buttons, easier to produce, cheaper in bulk. But no one really accounted for how tin reacts to freezing temperatures.
There's a phenomenon called tin pest. It sounds like a minor inconvenience, like mothballs or a chipmunk infestation. But no, tin pest is when tin, exposed to extreme cold, begins to crumble. Literally, it transforms from shiny metal to gray powder. The buttons didn't just break, they disintegrated. Historians still argue whether this was a major contributor to Napoleon's disaster in Russia or just a quirky footnote. But you can't help wondering, how many men died not from bullets, but from losing the fight against frozen buttonholes?
You reach a checkpoint, an abandoned barn now being used as a camp. Inside, dozens of soldiers gather around small fires. You sit down, stretch your legs, and try to warm your hands. Someone's pulling out a needle and thread, trying to sew a spare button onto their collar. The irony is rich. The grand army reduced to arts and crafts by candlelight.
One man near you wears his coat open. Not by choice, he's out of buttons entirely. He's looped some twine through the holes instead, fashioning a makeshift fastener. It looks ridiculous. It works, mostly. Meanwhile, whispers drift through the camp. They knew, someone mutters. They knew the buttons would fail. Another shrugs. Napoleon doesn't wear tin. His are brass, always brass. You look down at your own fasteners. They seem to be holding, for now.
It's tempting to laugh, isn't it? All the glory, all the strategy, and here you are measuring victory in the form of which buttons haven't turned to dust yet.
Eventually, you drift off into a fitful nap, your coat barely closed, your hands curled under your arms for warmth. In the distance, a button falls with a tiny click onto the barn's wooden floor. It rolls, then stops. Section 2. Morning isn't exactly a sunrise. It's just the gray sky getting slightly less dark. You wake to the crackle of footsteps outside the barn and the muted curses of men realizing their buttons haven't made it through the night. You check yours again. The top one's gone entirely. Vanished. Just a loose thread, flapping like a lazy flag in the winter air. Now, if you were at court in Paris, this wouldn't be such a problem, but here, with temperatures sinking faster than morale, that tiny buttonhole might as well be a gaping wound. Back in France, before all this snow and sorrow, there had been endless debate about what the army should wear. Napoleon wasn't just a general. He was a micromanager with strong opinions about style. His greatcoats were inspired by Roman military wear, revolutionary symbolism, and occasionally pure flair. Long, dramatic folds, high collars, fitted waist, yes, even in war, the man knew how to make an entrance. But his fashion dreams came with problems. Each uniform design had to be approved, tested, reproduced, inspected, and then altered whenever he changed his mind, which, let's face it, was often. 1 month, the greatcoat needed 8 buttons, then 12, then 8 again, but placed closer together. Tailors practically lived in a state of mild panic. Historians still argue whether these constant uniform updates were a calculated form of control or just Napoleon being Napoleon. Every stitch sent a message, and he knew it. A soldier in a sharp coat stood taller, maybe even fought harder, or at least looked better doing it. You think back to the quartermaster who issued your coat, some tired man in a Paris warehouse surrounded by crates of buttons, needles, and measuring tapes. He handed you your uniform like it was a sacred relic, muttering something about proper regulation collar spacing. Back then, the coat had structure, confidence, but after months of wear, snow, and too many long marches, it's just wool and wishful thinking. The fabric's thinning at the elbows, and the lining is more memory than material. You've patched it twice with scavenged thread, not pretty but functional. You pass a soldier line for morning rations. He's got one brass button on his whole coat, and he wears it like a medal. It glints when he moves. Everyone notices. He grins, says it's from a captain's coat he found in a snowdrift. Didn't need it anymore, he says with a shrug. You don't ask. There's a kind of quiet resentment building, not just for the cold or the food or lack of both, but for the uniforms themselves. These coats were meant to represent glory, order, and unity. Now they feel like betrayal by fabric. It wasn't about buttons falling off. The whole design was flawed for winter warfare. Long coats meant to billow impressively on horseback now drag damp and heavy in the snow. The high collars, so regal in theory, rub raw against frostbitten skin. Even the pockets are in the wrong places. You find yourself fantasizing about modern zippers. Simple, silent, strong. Of course, zippers wouldn't be invented until decades later. So for now, it's you and your buttons. Your fragile, poorly designed, temperature-sensitive buttons. There's a growing joke among the men. The Russians didn't beat us. The buttons did. And like most trench humor, it's not entirely a joke. In the still moments between marches and meals, you hear quiet button-related swearing. Some try tying their coats with string, others repurpose bits of rope. One creative soul is spotted using the wax seals from letters to fasten his lapels shut. Desperate, definitely. Effective, surprisingly so. You overhear 2 officers arguing over uniform specs. One insists that Napoleon had ordered a thicker wool blend last year. The other swears that the design change never made it out of committee. Too expensive, he says. Besides, it clashed with the dragoon sashes. And there it is, fashion over function again. Historians still debate just how deeply Napoleon was involved in the fabric of uniform logistics. Some say he micromanaged everything. Others that he left it to overworked bureaucrats in Paris. But somewhere along the way, someone approved tin buttons for winter gear. Someone forgot or didn't know about tin pest, and someone, probably thousands of someones, paid the price. You help a young conscript repair his coat. He doesn't have any spare buttons, so you give him one from your cuff. It's already cracking, but it'll last a day, maybe. He nods in thanks, says nothing else. His nose is red, his ears wrapped in a scrap of scarf. You both sit in silence, sewing slowly with numb fingers. That night, around a too-small fire, an older soldier begins recounting a time when the uniforms were better. Back in Egypt, he says, they gave us linen, lightweight, breezy, fit for a pharaoh. Someone laughs, softly, dryly. Another adds, yeah, but you didn't need buttons in Egypt. You stare into the fire thinking about all the grand parades, oil portraits, and statues showing men in pristine uniforms, buttons gleaming like medals. They never show the cracked ones, the missing ones, the ones that didn't survive the march. And you keep one extra button hidden in your boot, wrapped in a strip of wool, a tiny insurance policy, the last defense against the wind. Section 3. You wake up to the sound of frost snapping in the timber above your head. The barn roof groans under the weight of snow. Your coat is still there, thankfully, still clinging to you like a sleepy pet, still mostly intact, though it feels like the tin buttons have shrunk during the night. They haven't, of course. You have. As you stretch and lace your boots, your fingers brush across that top button again, or where it used to be. It's gone now, clean off, just a ghostly circle of wool where warmth once clung. You sigh and add it to the list of things you've lost lately, your appetite, your second pair of socks, and now this tiny circle of vanished ambition. Later that morning, the unit gathers near a cluster of wagons where an officer, clearly shivering under too many scarves, is trying to organize a resupply effort. Coats and buttons, he mumbles to a clerk with thick mittens and an ink-stained nose. Log them, prioritize officers. You roll your eyes. Officers always get the brass. In the distance, someone's trying to trade a piece of bread for a replacement button. You don't blame them. At this point, a decent fastener is worth more than dry rations. You check your own pockets. One spare button, cracked, one needle, no thread. You're in survival couture now. Let's rewind a bit, back to the golden days of the French Empire. Paris, in all its silk stocking glory, was a hive of tailors, fashion houses, and uniform regulators. Napoleon had a centralized system for military attire, le dépôt de la guerre. It wasn't just about mass-producing gear, it was about producing identity. A French soldier wasn't just any soldier. He wore a specific cut, a specific hat, and a very specific line of buttons that ran down his front like a row of military medals. You can imagine the Parisian tailors frowning over sketches. No, one says. 12 buttons down the front, evenly spaced. They must gleam like honor, another sighs. But this tin, it tarnishes. It flakes. The quartermaster shrugs. It's cheap. It's available. It's good enough. Historians still argue whether France's use of tin over brass or pewter was born of necessity or oversight. Some claim it was economic, a strategic budget, cut masked as efficiency. Others suggest it was a logistical mishap, a consequence of overextension during a period when the empire was waging war on almost every border. Either way, the result is the same. You, now in the cold, with a chest full of metal sand. As the march resumes, you take a moment to observe the army as a moving tapestry of failure and adaptation. Coats pinned shut with bones, buttons carved from wood, bits of leather tied in haphazard knots. One soldier wears a woman's brooch to fasten his collar. He swears it belonged to his sweetheart. Nobody questions it. In fact, several ask if she has any more. This far into the campaign, it's less an army and more a traveling museum of makeshift tailoring. You walk beside a man from Brittany who has replaced every one of his coat buttons with polished seashells. "Took me weeks," he mutters, "but they don't rust and they don't flake." You nod. He may be the smartest man here. You reach a shallow ravine where camp is to be set. Tents are pitched with what's left of the canvas, and fires flicker to life like stubborn stars. You drop to your knees, rubbing your hands. Another day survived, barely. A captain, young, clearly newer to the horrors than the rest, walks by inspecting coats. "Regulation uniform," he says, voice flat. "Maintain appearance." You don't even look up. Someone nearby laughs and whispers, "Maybe regulation uniforms will warm our bones tonight." And yet, somewhere in your mind, you remember what these uniforms were supposed to be. A symbol of pride, of belonging. When you first wore it back in France, the coat hugged your shoulders like purpose itself. Now it feels like a wet blanket stitched from broken promises.
That night, as the wind howls through camp and smoke stings your eyes, you find yourself sharing a blanket with 3 other soldiers. You're all wrapped in wool, breathing in unison like a single shivering animal. And as you drift, you remember stories of Roman soldiers who wore iron fibulae instead of buttons, of Vikings who used toggles made of bone, of Mongol warriors who tied their coats with ribbons of silk and horsehair.
None of them used tin. Section 4. The snow doesn't stop. It just changes moods. Sometimes a fine, drifting powder that settles on your shoulders like dandruff from heaven. Other times a wet, angry slap in the face. Today it's the quiet kind, which somehow feels more ominous. You march silently through it, each footstep muffled, like the ground itself is trying not to draw attention. Your coat no longer closes properly. With the top 3 buttons gone, the collar flaps open like a gaping yawn. You've tied it shut with a bit of twine stolen from a broken satchel, and even that's starting to fray. Every gust of wind finds its way in, coiling down your spine like a snake made of ice. Ahead you spot a broken sled, half buried, its contents spilled like entrails. You and 2 others investigate. Just another abandoned supply unit too slow to keep up. A crate has burst open, revealing a treasure trove. Military uniform parts, hats, belts, threadbare shirts, and yes, buttons. You almost laugh. A whole sack of them, glinting weakly in the snow. Not brass, not gold, tin. They look like candy dropped by a sadder, colder version of St. Nicholas. You pocket a few before the officer sees. There's a brief squabble. 2 men fight over a belt buckle like dogs over a bone. One wins, the other limps away. Nobody helps. You're all too tired, too cold, too buttonless to care. As night falls, the fire crackles like it's trying to imitate laughter. One of the older men, Luke, from Lion, begins muttering about the early days of the campaign. "Do you remember Spain?" he says to no one. "Too hot, we complained like fools."
You do remember, not Spain exactly, but the stories. Soldiers collapsing from heat exhaustion, wool uniforms in August, and yet they had buttons that held, brass ones, heavy, solid, eternal seeming. Those uniforms survived worse than weather. They survived boredom.
Back then, Napoleon had made personal inspections. He was known to approach a soldier and flick at their buttons, checking for shine, straightness, alignment. It wasn't vanity, not exactly. It was discipline made visible. If a man couldn't care for his coat, how could he carry a musket? Historians still argue whether these inspections improved morale or simply humiliated the lower ranks. Some suggest Napoleon used them to spot leadership potential, those who stood out even in the smallest details. Others believe it was pure theater, the emperor staging order in a world spiraling toward entropy. You'd like to see him now, wading through the Russian snow, flicking the drooping, salt-stained lapels of men too numb to salute. You wonder what he'd say about the man 3 rows back, whose buttons have been replaced with dried cherries. Probably nothing polite. One soldier has taken to wearing a belt over his coat to hold it shut. You try the same and discover that, yes, compression is warmth. It's not elegant, but it keeps the snow out. Another man uses a length of curtain cord for the same effect. "Stole it from a burned farmhouse," he says proudly. The drapes were gone, but the cords, they had potential. That's the game now, invention through desperation. Someone suggests melting broken buttons into crude molds, reforming them into coins or charms. It's a bad idea. Tin pest spreads like gossip in a small village. Quietly, then suddenly. No one wants it near their gear.
That night, a rumor spreads. A captured Russian soldier claimed their coats were lined with sheepskin. Real sheepskin. Not decorative, not symbolic, actual warmth. The kind of thing that doesn't flake off in minus 20 degrees. You picture it briefly. Fur-lined cuffs, a collar that doesn't betray you in the wind. But your reality is different. Your coat is military issue, French proud and threadbare. The tin buttons you salvaged from the broken crate sit in your pocket, not yet stitched in. You're afraid they'll snap the moment you press them through the fabric.
You remember your mother's sewing kit back home. It had a tiny compartment for buttons, sorted by color and size. You used to think it was silly. Who needs that many buttons? Now you would walk barefoot through snow for a single brass one. You fall asleep with your hand over your chest, feeling the loose buttonholes like a doctor checking a heartbeat. And you wonder how many empires fall not by battle but by fraying threads. Section 5. By now, your coat is less garment and more philosophy. You wrap it around yourself like an argument with fate. Maybe, if you hold on tight enough, the snow won't win. Maybe tin can outlast bone. The march resumes before sunrise. Pale light leaks over the hills, revealing a landscape so bleak it almost looks invented. The road is gone, replaced by an endless smear of slush and ice. You march in silence, footsteps in rhythm, like a tired drumline. Every few minutes, someone stumbles. Nobody helps. Helping takes energy. The man beside you, Pierre, from somewhere warm-sounding you've long since forgotten, has stitched scraps of fur along his lapels using horsehair. "It itches," he says, "but it's warmer than prayers." You admire his dedication. His buttons, however, are a mess. 3 different metals, no symmetry, one dangling by a single thread, like a drunken acrobat. He catches you looking. Napoleon would disapprove, he grins. Let him. You both chuckle and the laughter feels good in your chest, like something soft that hasn't been crushed yet.
In the distance, a supply wagon groans under a sagging canvas. It's stopped, one wheel cracked. As your unit passes, the officer waves you forward. Keep moving, he barks. Nothing here for you. Except there is. A bundle of discarded uniforms lies near the snowbank. Too small, too bloodied, too abandoned. You hesitate only briefly before stepping out of line. You and a few others descend like vultures on a banquet of misfortune. You find a jacket with intact buttons. Brass, old style, predating the switch to tin. Heavier, etched with a faint emblem. You don't ask where the jacket came from. You don't want to know who wore it last. You just pry the buttons off with numb fingers and slip them into your pouch like stolen currency.
Later that day, the wind picks up, sharp, sideways, like it's trying to slice you in half. You pull your coat tighter and finally thread one of the brass buttons through the fabric. It holds, miraculously, a tiny act of defiance against the elements. That evening, you share a fire with 5 others. No one talks much. One man, delirious from cold, mumbles something about the Egyptian campaign. Hot sand in your boots, he says. No buttons lost then. You recall the stories. Napoleon brought more than just troops to Egypt. He brought scientists, scholars, even artists, a whole army of intellectuals, many of whom spent more time drawing hieroglyphs than loading muskets. The uniforms were impractical, of course, too European for desert heat, but at least they stayed intact. Buttons didn't flake off at the first sign of adversity. Historians still argue whether the Egyptian campaign was a military disaster or an intellectual success. Some say it was a brilliant distraction, a PR move to make Napoleon seem enlightened. Others say it drained resources and accomplished little, but no one argues this. The uniforms held up better.
In a strange way, the buttons of the Egyptian campaign outlived the soldiers. Museums in Paris still house some of them. Gleaming brass tokens of a journey half scientific, half imperialist, all uncomfortable.
You sit there, knees tucked to your chest, and picture your button joining them one day. A museum piece labeled, "Recovered from the Russian Front." Visitors will walk by, sipping lattes and whisper, "How quaint." They won't know the cold it resisted. They won't feel the ache in your fingers. The fire dies down. Someone offers a strip of dried meat. You chew mechanically. It tastes like defeat. You sleep beneath your coat, arms crossed over your chest like a mummy. The brass button pressing lightly into your collarbone. It's the first night in weeks that the wind hasn't stolen all your warmth. A small victory. Morning brings worse news. 2 men froze during the night. You don't ask who. If you know, it'll hurt. If you don't, you can keep walking. That's how things work now. One foot in front of the other, dragging a coat that's mostly symbolic. You march past a dead horse, its saddle still strapped tight, the leather cracked with cold. The insignia on its side reads, 2nd Regiment of Cuirassiers, Cavalry, long gone. Someone's already taken the saddlebag. A single button lies in the snow beside it, stamped with a curving end. You pick it up, turn it over in your hand. It's heavier than it looks. Maybe it's hope, maybe just brass. Section 6. Your hand closes around that brass end button like it's a charm from some half-remembered saint. The weight of it is disproportionate, not in grams but in ghosts. It once fastened the coat of a man who rode ahead, who didn't slog through snowdrifts up to his thighs, whose horse still had heat in its blood.
You pocket it. You don't tell anyone.
The army is thinner now. Every day, fewer boots tread the ice-packed road, fewer coughs in the night, fewer fires, and fewer buttons. The coat you wear is now a Frankenstein of stolen parts. Your original sleeves, a new right flap, a different collar. 3 brass buttons, 2 tin, 1 chunk of bone you carved into a circle and notched with your knife. It holds, barely. A little tilt, and then it pops out like a cork. Better than nothing, you mutter, and the man beside you snorts.
Barely, he says, showing his own coat, buttoned with teeth. Real teeth, probably horse. You don't ask, you respect the ingenuity. Desperation makes engineers of you all.
The snow begins to fall again. Soft this time, polite, like it's sorry for earlier. Still, it clings to your eyelashes, masks the potholes, disguises the frozen dead. You trip once, catch yourself. The man behind you doesn't. He lands face first, doesn't rise. You want to help. But the column moves on. Helping costs heat. heat cost survival. Somewhere near Polotsk, or what used to be Polotsk, you stop for a moment's rest. The ruins of a stone church rise from the white like bones from a grave. You duck inside, a few others follow. The pews are gone, burned for fuel. The altar's been defaced, but tucked behind a shattered lectern, you find something unexpected. A French officer's coat, folded, abandoned, half frozen. You know better than to trust appearances. You poke it with your boot. No body, just the coat. It's almost ceremonial. Dark blue wool, gold piping, polished epaulets, and best of all, buttons. Rows of them, identical, brass, unflaked. You look around, no one sees. You move fast. The buttons come off easily, your fingers thawed by adrenaline. Into your pouch they go, one by one, like coins in a bank you'll never withdraw from. Historians still argue why the retreat failed so catastrophically. Was it poor planning, overconfidence, inadequate supply lines, a logistical nightmare dressed as ambition? Probably all of it. But none of them mention the buttons. You begin to think they should. Because here's the thing. Once your coat opens, the cold gets in. And once the cold gets in, it doesn't leave. It lingers. It builds. One open flap, one missing fastener, and your body starts negotiating with the dark. Maybe just a nap, maybe 5 minutes, maybe you won't even notice. That night, beside another fire, you listen as two older soldiers argue about uniforms from past wars. The Austrians wore white, one says. Always looked like ghosts on the battlefield. The other grunts. They were ghosts, and their buttons were pewter, useless in rain. Someone brings up the Italian campaign, Napoleon's early days, back when he was just a Corsican upstart with a talent for artillery and a terrible haircut. They say he obsessed over uniform regulations then too, insisting that even the poorest infantrymen had matching buttons. Symmetry is discipline, he allegedly said, or maybe that was just legend. Either way, you get it now. A coat that closes says, I'm not done yet. I'm still here.
The man next to you, Jacques, with the limp and the sharp tongue, tells a story about how Napoleon once halted a march to lecture an officer whose coat was improperly fastened. We are not savages, he supposedly said. We are French. Everyone chuckled, a dry, wind-chapped sound. You sleep under a fallen beam that night, shielded from wind. You feel the brass button press against your chest as you curl into yourself. It's oddly comforting, like a small metallic promise that someone once cared about appearances, even here, even now.
In the morning, your boots don't fit. Your feet have swollen, bruised by cold and marching. You cut slits in the sides and bind them with strips from a ruined satchel. You fasten them with, what else? Buttons. Brass ones, double duty, footwear innovation, 1812 style. Later, you come across a woman, a local, older than time, bundled in what looks like every piece of cloth she's ever owned. She sells baked roots and buttons, real ones, wooden, mostly some bone. One ivory, cracked but beautiful. You trade a bit of salt pork for it. She doesn't ask what you'll use it for. She knows. The days grow shorter, the cold grows worse.
But your coat stays closed. Somehow, that feels like a win.
Section 7. The sound of marching has changed. It used to be rhythm, syncopated boots over soil, the chorus of a disciplined army. Now it's a drag, a shuffle, a scuff of half-frozen leather over the groan of packed ice. Fewer men, fewer horses, fewer songs. Even the wind seems quieter, like it's grown bored with your suffering. You clutch your coat shut as the wind cuts sideways through the column, stinging like soap in an open wound. But your buttons hold. For now, they click faintly as you walk, brass and bone and borrowed metal, keeping the coat pinned shut across your hollowed ribs.
A new officer rides past, face pale, mustache frozen at the ends. His coat is flawless, all brass buttons gleaming, spaced exactly. Probably inspected that morning. He sees you, doesn't stop, just nods slightly as if you're both survivors of a joke too grim to explain.
Word spreads of a nearby village, unmarked, unburned. Wooden roof, someone says. Shelter. It becomes the North Star of the march. You don't know its name, nobody does, but when you reach it, it's real.
Barely.
Houses lean like old men after church. One still has glass in the windows. A miracle. You and 4 others claim it like pirates storming a leaky galleon. There's a stove, no fuel. One buttoned cushion on a chair, velvet, worn smooth. You almost laugh. A button on a chair. You steal it anyway.
You sleep on the floor, close together, your coat wrapped tight and pinned like armor. You dream of buttons falling from the sky like coins, tapping your face, melting into the snow before you can catch them.
Morning arrives gray and sour. Someone's boots are gone, stolen in the night. Nobody speaks. Trust has frayed, unraveling like thread from a cuff. The man who lost them wraps his feet in rags and limps forward without complaint.
You remember a story your grandfather told once, Napoleon and his tailors. Supposedly, he kept two in his personal train during campaign season, not for fitting grand uniforms, but to ensure his buttons were shined before every appearance. Perception, he'd said, is victory before the first shot. Might have been apocryphal, but now, stumbling through mud with a patchwork coat and a mouth full of frost, you understand the logic.
Historians still argue how much of Napoleon's myth was self-invented. The hand and waistcoat pose, the dramatic hat, the staged paintings of him leading charges up alpine peaks in spotless white, a man obsessed with image down to the shine of his buttons. And here you are, trudging through the ruins of that image. That day, you pass a monument, or what remains of one, a stone column snapped in half, covered in snow and moss, an inscription in Russian. You can't read it. One of the others claims it was once a tribute to Peter the Great. Now it's ours, he says, knocking a chunk loose with the butt of his musket. Spoils of something. You find another button nearby, not French, Russian, round, smooth, unmarked, heavier than expected. You pocket it anyway. You're not picky these days. Cold doesn't care about allegiance.
That evening, you repair a tear in your sleeve with a bootlace and a carved sliver of bone. You tie it shut. Not elegant, but it holds. Survival has no dress code.
Across the fire, a young soldier sings, softly, brokenly, some lullaby you don't recognize. You try to join in. Your voice cracks. You cough instead. The man beside you shows off a button made from dried apple skin, stiffened with frost and glue. Tastes better than it works, he shrugs. Everyone laughs. The kind of laugh that's half cry, half wheeze.
Later, someone passes around a flask. The alcohol tastes like fire and regret. It burns clean. You take 2 sips, then fall into a sleep so heavy it doesn't feel like rest. It feels like forgetting.
You dream again. This time you're in a tailor's shop in Paris, warm, smelling of starch and chalk. Napoleon himself sits beside you, watching as the tailor measures your coat. He frowns.
Too many mismatched buttons, he says. You start to explain about the retreat, the snow, the cold, the dead, but he waves a hand. History will remember the buttons, he says, not the reasons.
You wake up shivering.
In the dim light of dawn, you check your coat. The buttons are still there, but one is loose.
Section 8. Your fingers are stiff as you push the thread through. Not proper thread, not really. A twisted cord from a boot lining. You're repairing the loose button you dreamed about, though it was never truly about the button, was it? Maybe it was about Napoleon watching from behind that dream tailor's desk, his judgment weightier than any battlefield. The thread phrase, you nodded anyway. Function over form, always. Your hands shake, not from fear, not anymore. You've outlasted that, but from the cold that never leaves your bones now. The coat stays closed. The brass buttons, dull but dependable, keep the worst of the wind at bay.
Someone says a name you haven't heard in weeks, Smolensk.
Is that where you're heading or where you just came from? Directions have lost meaning. What matters is warmth, shelter, the next meager fire. Your group is smaller again. 8 men, maybe 9. You stopped counting. The talk today is quieter, the jokes fewer. But when someone stumbles over a tree root and lands face first in a snowbank, there's a burst of laughter, real, brief, sad. You help pull him up. His coat is buttoned with bits of tin shaped like snails. Stole him off a church door, he says almost proudly. Divine fastening. The path leads past a half-frozen stream. One man tries to drink. The ice gives and his glove slips into the water. Gone. No one offers another. There's nothing left to offer.
You walk past a dead horse, stiff as driftwood. Someone's taken its mane, likely for thread. You wonder how long it's been there. The flies, mercifully, are gone. The cold has claimed them too.
Historians still debate how many men survived the retreat. The estimates swing wildly, from tens of thousands to less than a few thousand, depending on where the line of survival is drawn. Do you have to be whole, sane, remember your name?
Napoleon, of course, wasn't with you. Not here. He left weeks ago, speeding ahead in a sleigh built for comfort, pulled by the fastest horses he could still command. His buttons surely stayed polished. His coat never opened.
You want to hate him for that, but you're too tired.
That night, you rest inside the burnt-out remains of a tavern. The floor is ash, but the walls still stand. There's half a door, enough to wedge shut. It creaks. You like the sound. Something about it feels alive.
By the glow of the fire, a younger soldier takes out his only remaining possession, a napkin embroidered with a monogram. Found it near Vilnius, he says. Was gonna give it to someone. He doesn't say who. You don't ask. You offer a button from your pouch, a duplicate brass one. You press it into his palm. What's this for, he asks. A spare, you say.
He doesn't thank you, just nods. In the morning, the tavern's roof collapses behind you. The snow did it in. You all stare for a moment, as if expecting a ghost to rise from the debris. Nothing does.
You walk on. The man who'd sung lullabies now hums softly. He stops only to cough. He's still got a silver button on his collar. It catches the sun for a brief second, then dulls again under cloud.
You hear murmurs of another checkpoint ahead, another town, maybe even shelter. You don't believe it, but you walk.
Section 9. The road stretches ahead, an endless ribbon of white and gray. Your breath comes out in small clouds, puffing rhythmically into the frozen air. Every step feels heavier than the last, like you're dragging the weight of winter itself through mud and frostbite. A soldier near you is limping badly, his coat threadbare, held together by mismatched buttons. Copper, bone, even a worn coin. You wonder how many of those buttons belong to men who didn't make it this far. Maybe they stitched their memories into those coats. You recall an old saying, a button lost is a battle lost. It's not true, of course, but in moments like this, a little superstition can keep you going. The column approaches what's left of a village. Smoke curls lazily from a crooked chimney. You don't know if it's friend or foe. Desperation breeds suspicion, but the smell of burning wood is irresistible. Maybe warmth awaits. Inside, the villagers eye you with cautious curiosity. An old woman offers a bowl of thick, gritty soup handed over with hands as cracked as the frozen earth outside. You accept, the taste earthy and faintly sweet, a reminder that life persists even in ruin. You learn the village once sat along a trade route, known for its pottery and simple festivals. The buttons on your coat, you realize, are like tiny relics from those old lives, small, overlooked tokens of stories now silent.
One villager shows you a collection of buttons found in an ancient field nearby. Some bronze, some silver, all mysteriously carved with symbols you don't recognize. She whispers that they belong to a forgotten tribe. Historians still argue whether these symbols were protective charms or mere decoration.
You sit beside a dying fire, feeling the warmth seep slowly into your frozen fingers. The crackle and pop of burning wood seems louder here, more alive, and for a moment you almost forget the cold, the march, the loss. Later, as you settle down, you finger a button that's been loose for days. You press it firmly back into place. It holds. And in that small act, just a button fastened against the cold, you find a thread of hope. Section 10. Morning light filters weakly through the frost-covered windows. You wake to the smell of damp earth and wood smoke, remnants of last night's fire still glowing faintly beneath the ashes. Outside, the world is silent except for the occasional crunch of footsteps in snow and the distant call of a crow. You button up your coat carefully, each fastener a small victory against the chill. There's a certain rhythm now to fastening and unfastening, an oddly soothing routine in the chaos. It's a small, stubborn defiance of the retreat's brutal indifference. The village is quiet, but movement stirs near the edge of the woods. A local boy, no older than 10, offers you a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside, a loaf of coarse bread and some dried berries. You accept with a nod, feeling a rare flicker of gratitude. This place feels different. Not just a waypoint, but a brief sanctuary carved out from the relentless march of frost and war. You wonder how many others have found such havens along the way. Secret pockets of life hidden beneath layers of snow. The villagers tell tales of the silk routes, ancient trade paths that once brought color and spice from Asia to Europe. They speak of buttons made from silk thread, embroidered with stories instead of stamped brass. Historians still debate whether these luxurious buttons were status symbols or practical fasteners for noble robes. You imagine Napoleon in his grand halls never having to worry about frostbite or muddy roads, buttoning his immaculate coats while you trudge through snow. The contrast humbles you.
A local elder, with hands weathered like old leather, shows you a carved wooden button worn smooth by time. He says it's a charm against bad luck. You tuck it into your pouch, thinking maybe luck is just as important as thread.
As night falls, the wind whispers against the walls. You lie back, listening to the soft crackle of embers, the quiet breathing of your companions, and the distant murmur of the village settling in for sleep. You feel the weight of your buttons, worn, mismatched, but holding firm, like tiny anchors in a drifting world. Section 11. The chill settles deep into your bones as you rise again, stepping outside into the pale morning light. Frost coats the trees like fragile lace, and the distant hills are draped in a silent white cloak. The cold is a constant companion now, pressing in on every breath, every movement. Your coat, patched and buttoned, feels heavier somehow. More than just fabric and metal. It's a testament to endurance, each button a tiny victory over the relentless march of winter and war. As you trudge forward, a stray dog joins your group, tail wagging cautiously. You share your last scraps of bread. The dog's presence is a quiet comfort, proof that life persists in small, unexpected ways. You hear talk among the men of the lost art of early modern medicine, herbs, poultices, and strange remedies once common in Europe but now nearly forgotten. They whisper of plaster buttons, small discs soaked in healing balms pressed to wounds. Historians still debate how effective these treatments truly were, or if they were more about ritual than cure. You recall a tale from your youth, how Napoleon once ordered his tailors to sew miniature pouches behind buttons, filled with aromatic herbs to mask unpleasant smells on long campaigns. It sounds almost too clever to be true, but somehow fits the man's obsession with appearance and detail. Your feet ache, but you keep moving, following the vague map etched in your mind. The retreat has narrowed to a single path, one worn by despair and determination alike. At a frozen river crossing, you pause. The ice groans underfoot, threatening to give way. One man tests the surface, then carefully leads the group across. The river's dark water rushes beneath the brittle crust, a reminder that beneath the frozen exterior, forces of nature never rest. You press on, the wind rising in your ears like a distant chant. Buttons catch the light, brass, bone, wood, each reflecting a piece of the journey, a silent testimony to survival. As night falls, you huddle close to the others. The dog curls beside you, warm against the cold. You button your coat one last time, feeling the familiar click of metal against fabric. And for a moment, despite the cold, the hunger, and the endless march, you feel something almost like peace. Section 12. The morning sun is pale, barely penetrating the thick layer of clouds hanging low over the landscape. You feel the cold bite sharper than usual, but there's a strange clarity in the air. As you pull your coat tighter and button it carefully, you notice how worn your buttons have become. Some edges smoothed by countless tangles with gloves and straps, others scratched or bent like silent companions on this exhausting journey.
A rumor circulates quietly among the men. A nearby town might have supplies or at least shelter. You don't dare believe it, but the mere thought sparks a faint hope that flickers stubbornly in your chest. You recall stories of buttons from a forgotten corner of the world, African traders who used buttons carved from ivory and bone as currency, delicate craftsmanship marking both wealth and social status. These buttons were as much about identity as function. Historians still debate whether these adornments influenced European fashion or developed entirely independently.
The march continues, every footstep imprinting the snow with the faint echo of lives long past and present struggles. You pass a small frozen pond where a child once played. Now the only movement is the flutter of a worn ribbon caught in a bush, a faded token of happier times. You stop briefly to adjust a button that has come loose on your sleeve. It's a simple task, but somehow comforting, a tiny act of control in a world unraveling at the edges. You think of Napoleon's own obsession with such details. For him, a button wasn't just a fastener. It was a symbol of order, control, and power. Nearby, one of your companions hums a soft tune, a lullaby passed down through generations. You listen, the notes weaving into the crisp air like a gentle balm. You wonder if anyone, anywhere is listening to the same melody tonight. As the day fades, you find yourself reflecting on the journey so far. Each button sewn, lost, or found feels like a small chapter in a larger story, one of survival, hope, and the human need to hold things together no matter how fragile. Section 13. The snow falls softly now, muffling the sounds of footsteps and whispered conversations. You button your coat slowly, fingers numb but careful, as if each button holds a secret worth preserving. Around you, the world feels suspended and quiet, a moment caught between breaths of ice and fading light. You think of an odd detail you read once. In the courts of 18th century Russia, buttons were sometimes used as secret messages, tiny coded symbols sewn into garments that only a few could decipher. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was, or if it was just a fanciful rumor whispered among spies and courtiers. Your mind drifts to Napoleon, who reportedly had buttons custom made with tiny portraits of himself, worn like badges of honor by his closest aides. It fits the man's penchant for spectacle and control. This need to have even the smallest detail reflect his power. The group moves slowly now, each step a test of will. Your feet sink slightly in the fresh snow, the crunch underfoot oddly soothing in its regularity. The cold is relentless but also strangely calming, the kind of chill that numbs both pain and thought. You notice a button on a comrade's coat. It's shaped like a small anchor, worn smooth by years of use. Someone jokes quietly that it's the button of last hope, the final fastener that holds you to the world. Around a bend, you find a small wooden cross marking a grave, unadorned except for a single brass button placed gently atop it. The scene feels sacred in its simplicity, a quiet tribute amidst chaos. You press on, the buttons clicking softly as you move, a subtle rhythm in the stillness. Section 14. The march is slower now, shadows lengthening as the day draws toward evening. Your hands, red and stiff, fumble briefly with a stubborn button before it finally snaps into place with a soft click. It's a small victory, but it feels significant, a momentary assertion of order amid growing exhaustion. Around you, the men move like ghosts, their faces pale and drawn, eyes hollow but resolute. The cold presses in, making every breath shallow, every step an effort. Yet the buttons on their coats gleam faintly in the dim light, tokens of a past life still clinging to the present. You recall an old tale from the Mediterranean where sailors once fastened tiny seashells into their clothing as buttons, believing they'd bring good fortune on perilous voyages. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or early trade symbolism, but the thought of fastening luck itself to fabric feels oddly comforting. Napoleon's buttons, meanwhile, were a world apart, precise, brass, uniform, and designed to impress both allies and enemies. His obsession with their arrangement was more than vanity. It was a carefully curated image of control. You wonder if, in his mind, the perfect button was a metaphor for the perfect empire. Each piece in place, nothing out of order.
The wind picks up, swirling snow into your face. You pull your collar higher, feeling the cold seep beneath the layers. But the buttons hold, steadfast and sure.
Ahead, the faint outline of a village appears, a promise of respite, or perhaps just another mirage conjured by hope and fatigue. You press forward, heart steady, hand steady, every button fastened as tightly as your resolve. Section 15, the final stretch of the journey unfolds beneath a sky heavy with dusk. Your footsteps are slower now, the weight of countless miles settling deep in your muscles and bones. The buttons on your coat glint faintly, worn smooth by time, touch, and the harsh elements. You think back to the beginning of this march, how each button felt new and purposeful, like a tiny promise. Now, some are cracked or missing, but each remaining fastener is a testament to endurance, a small beacon in a vast winter wilderness. Stories circulate softly around the campfire, voices low and tired. One tale speaks of buttons from the Pacific Islands, made of carved shells and bones worn by chiefs and shamans alike. These buttons weren't just functional, they were symbols of identity and power. Historians still debate how such traditions influenced European fashion during the Age of Exploration. Napoleon's fascination with buttons seems both trivial and profound, his desire for order mirrored in every stitch, every clasp. You realize that buttons, in their simplicity, hold complex stories about human nature, culture, and survival. As you settle down for the night, you finger the last button on your coat, a small plain piece, but somehow perfect. The cold seeps away, replaced by a gentle warmth, the hum of quiet companionship, and the faint crackle of embers. You close your eyes, the weight of the journey lifting with each breath. The buttons, like quiet sentinels, have kept you together, and now they let you rest.
The cold fades into a soft, distant memory as you drift gently into sleep. Your breath slows, matching the rhythm of the quiet night around you. The world feels still, wrapped in a blanket of stars and whispered stories. Each button, once a simple fastener, becomes a gentle anchor in the vast expanse of night.
There is peace here in the quiet, the cold, the steady rhythm of survival. Let your mind wander softly through these moments where history and humanity weave a calm tapestry.
Rest now. The journey pauses, but the story lives on in the quiet clicks of buttons fastened against the dark. Sweet dreams.